45 years ago, a 23-year-old schoolteacher named Loretta Pines vanished from the small town of Harlan Creek, Georgia, leaving behind her unlocked Datsun, a bag of groceries still sitting on the passenger seat, and a classroom full of second graders who would spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to the woman who taught them how to read. Authorities at the time concluded she had left voluntarily. A young woman, they said, who had simply decided to start a new life somewhere else. Her mother, Edna Pines, a retired seamstress who ironed other people's shirts for 30 cents apiece to keep her lights on, knew better. She said so every time anyone would listen. She said so until she couldn't say it anymore. Then, more than 4 decades later, a retired forensic genealogist named Curtis Odom, working in his spare bedroom on a cold case database nobody had asked him to build, ran a sample of decades-old DNA through a public ancestry registry, and watched a family tree bloom on his screen. What he found at the end of that tree would answer a question that Harlan Creek had buried so deep it thought the ground had swallowed it for good. But to understand what that answer meant, you first have to understand who Loretta Pines was. Harlan Creek, Georgia, in the summer of 1979, was the kind of place that still believed its own goodness. Population just under 4,000. 1 stoplight, a grain co-op on Route 9 that doubled as the place men gathered on Saturday mornings to argue about the Falcons. Screen doors on every house. Children who walked to school without their parents watching from the window, because everyone on every block was a neighbor, and neighbors watched out for each other. That was simply how things worked. It was the tail end of the decade that had given Harlan Creek CB radios and gas shortages and the long, slow embarrassment of Watergate. And people in town were tired of feeling uncertain. What they wanted was what Harlan Creek had always been: reliable, ordinary, theirs. Sunday dinners at the First Baptist Fellowship Hall. The high school football team playing under lights on Friday nights. Families who had lived on the same land their grandparents had cleared. The county fair in August, with the smell of funnel cake and cut grass and children shrieking on the tilt-a-whirl until long past dark. Loretta Pines had grown up 40 miles south, in Valdosta, the only daughter of Edna and Raymond Pines. She had studied education at Georgia Southern on a scholarship she'd earned by writing an essay about her 3rd-grade teacher. A woman who, Loretta wrote, had looked at her like she was already the person she was going to become. She graduated in the spring of 1978, took a position at Harlan Creek Elementary, and rented a small wood-frame house on Magnolia Lane, 3 blocks from the school. By September of 1979, she had already become, in the way that certain teachers do, indispensable. Her second graders called her Miss Pines. She organized a reading corner with beanbag chairs she bought with her own money. She kept a jar of peppermints on her desk and handed them out at the end of each Friday. She drove a white 1976 Datsun 210 that stalled at intersections on cold mornings and that she referred to, without apparent irony, as reliable. Her closest friend in Harlan Creek was a woman named Joyce Hadley, who taught 4th grade down the hall. They ate lunch together every day at a small table by the window that looked out onto the school garden. They went to the Dairy Queen on Route 9 on Thursday evenings, splitting a banana split and arguing pleasantly about which novels they should teach when the children were older. Joyce would say later that Loretta was the least dramatic person she had ever known. Someone who found a kind of deep satisfaction in small, consistent things. She triple-checked the lock on her front door each night before bed. She kept a list of every book she had ever read, going back to childhood, in a small spiral notebook on her nightstand. She sent her mother a letter every Sunday without fail. The last one was postmarked September 21, 1979. In it, she wrote that the leaves were just beginning to turn along the creek road, and that she thought this might be her favorite time of year in Harlan Creek. She wrote that she was happy. She never knew it was the last letter she would ever send. On the evening of Friday, September 28, 1979, Loretta Pines left Harlan Creek Elementary at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. Joyce Hadley watched her go from the window. Loretta had waved without turning around, the way she always did. A small, backward wave, almost casual. The school parking lot was nearly empty. The sky was that particular October shade of copper and violet that comes in early evening over flat Georgia land. At 4:40, she stopped at Kimball's Grocery on Ware Street. The owner, Earl Kimball, would later confirm that she came in, bought a bag of groceries, milk, a loaf of bread, a pound of ground beef, a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, and paid with a $5 bill and some change. He remembered because she'd been one short, and he'd waved her off. Told her to get it next time. She had smiled and said she'd remember. She was gone before the streetlights came on. Her Datsun was found at 6:50 the following morning by a man named Arlen Toombs, who ran mail on that route. It was parked on the unpaved shoulder of Mill Creek Road, approximately 2 miles east of downtown Harlan Creek. Both front windows were down. The engine was cold. The bag of groceries was still on the passenger seat, the milk now warm. The box of cornbread mix had fallen onto the floorboard. The door was not locked. There was no sign of a struggle anywhere around the vehicle. No skid marks, no broken glass. Her purse was in the car. Her house key was in the ignition. Joyce Hadley called the Harlan Creek Police Department at 7:30 that morning after getting no answer at Loretta's door. By noon, there were volunteers walking the creek banks. By nightfall, they had found nothing. The case number was opened on September 29, 1979. It would remain open, unsolved, for 45 years. The lead investigator assigned to Loretta's disappearance was a man named Deputy Sheriff Earl Braxton, 34 years old, who had worked the Howell County Sheriff's Department for 8 years and who had never worked a case like this one. He was thorough, by most accounts, a methodical man who kept his case notes in longhand on yellow legal pads. He had 2 daughters of his own, and people who knew him said the Pines case sat on him differently than his other work. Braxton spent the first 2 weeks canvassing every residence within 3 miles of where the Datsun was found. He interviewed 47 people. He documented every detail that seemed significant and several that didn't. One detail that he noted but could not interpret at the time: a neighbor on Mill Creek Road, a retired school bus driver named Hubert Cruz, told Braxton that he had seen a dark-colored pickup truck idling on the gravel shoulder near the creek turnoff sometime between 5 and 6 on the evening of September 28th. He hadn't thought anything of it. He couldn't say for certain what kind of truck or what color, only that it was there and then wasn't. Braxton circled that note. He came back to it. He could never make it into anything. The department developed 2 early persons of interest: a 28-year-old man from a neighboring county who had been seen at Kimball's Grocery earlier that afternoon and who had a prior arrest, ultimately ruled out when an alibi was confirmed by 3 independent witnesses, and a man whose name would not appear again in the public record for nearly 4 decades, a local contractor named Raymond Dale Pruitt, 32, who had done repair work on the school's back steps in August, and who had, according to Joyce Hadley, been seen watching the school parking lot from his truck on multiple occasions in September. Braxton spoke to Pruitt twice. Pruitt was cooperative, calm, and untroubled by the questions. There was no physical evidence connecting him to anything. The department moved on. Meanwhile, Edna Pines drove to Harlan Creek from Valdosta and did not leave for 6 weeks. She sat in her daughter's house. She answered the phone every time it rang, because she believed the next call would be the one. Joyce Hadley brought her food she didn't eat. The neighbors on Magnolia Lane came and went and tried to find the right thing to say. There was no right thing. Edna knew, in the way that mothers know things that can't be proven, that her daughter had not walked away from her unlocked car and her groceries and her carefully locked front door to start a new life somewhere else. She said as much to Deputy Braxton. He listened to her with what appeared to be genuine respect. And then the months turned into years, and the years accumulated in the way years do, and Loretta Pines became a file number in a cabinet in Howell County. By 1984, 5 years had passed. The house on Magnolia Lane had been rented to a young couple from Augusta. Loretta's second graders were now in 7th grade, most of them too young to fully understand what had happened, old enough to know it had. Harlan Creek Elementary had quietly retired the reading corner beanbag chairs when they wore out, and nobody had replaced them. By 1989, 10 years on, the reward poster that Earl Kimball had taped in his store window had faded from colored to near white. He left it up anyway. He'd replaced the tape twice. By 1995, Deputy Earl Braxton had retired from the Howell County Sheriff's Department. He had tried and failed to pass the Pines case to a successor who shared his investment in it. Before he left, he took one item home with him: a single manila envelope containing duplicates of his original interview notes and a photograph of Loretta's Datsun on the shoulder of Mill Creek Road. He kept it in a box in the closet of his home office. Every few years he opened it. He never found anything new. He kept opening it. In 2003, Edna Pines suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed on her left side. She moved into a care facility in Valdosta and spent her days in a room with a view of a small garden where she tended a pot of zinnias on the windowsill. She had told the staff on more than one occasion that she intended to outlive whoever had taken her daughter, because she wanted to know his name. The house on Magnolia Lane had been sold 3 times. The school garden that Loretta could see from her lunch table had been paved over for a new parking lot. Joyce Hadley had retired from teaching, had grandchildren now, and thought about Loretta every September when the leaves turned. She kept the last photo they'd taken together, blurry, Dairy Queen booth, banana split between them, in a frame on her kitchen counter. The file stayed in the cabinet. The evidence locker held what it held. No one came. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep telling stories like Loretta's, take a second to like this video and subscribe, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now, let's get back to Loretta Pines. Then, in the spring of 2023, something happened that nobody in Howell County had anticipated. Curtis Odom was not a detective. He was not a law enforcement officer. He was a 61-year-old retired forensic genealogist who had spent 30 years helping the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's cold case unit before a back injury pushed him into early retirement. He had built, in the 2 years since he stopped drawing a salary, a private database of unresolved Georgia cold cases, cases with biological evidence still in storage, cross-referenced against available genealogy platforms. He did it without funding, without staff, without anyone asking him to. He did it because he had 3 file drawers of cases he had never stopped thinking about, and because he found that the sitting still of retirement was worse than the work had ever been. The Pines case had been one of the first he entered. In the evidence locker at the Howell County Sheriff's Department, preserved in a sealed container since 1979, was a single cotton swab carrying a DNA sample that had been collected from the door handle of Loretta's Datsun. It had been tested once, in 1994, when DNA testing first became available to rural county departments, and the profile had been stored in the state database. It had returned no matches. It sat there for 29 more years. Odom had requested the profile through a formal public records process. It took 4 months to complete. When it arrived, he uploaded it to a public genealogy database, the kind ordinary people use to trace their family histories, and began the slow, methodical work of building outward from partial DNA matches to distant relatives, tracing lines forward and backward through generations. On a Tuesday morning in March 2023, he was cross-referencing a third-generation branch of a family tree when a name appeared that made him stop. He read it twice. He made a phone call to a contact at the GBI. He said, carefully and without drama, "I think you need to look at Raymond Dale Pruitt." Pruitt was 76 years old and had been living in a retirement community in Savannah for 11 years. He had married twice, had 3 adult children from his first marriage, attended a Baptist church, and had, by all appearances, lived an ordinary life as a retired building contractor. Neighbors described him as quiet and pleasant. He brought homemade pepper jelly to the Ho Christmas party. He drove a clean Ford F-150. In 1979, he had been 32 years old and employed as a local contractor with regular work across Howell County. He had done work at Harlan Creek Elementary in August of that year. He had been interviewed by Deputy Earl Braxton twice and cleared for lack of evidence. He had lived in Harlan Creek for 6 more years before moving for work, eventually settling in Chatham County. What Curtis Odom had found was this: Pruitt's nephew, a man who had never met his uncle in any meaningful way, who had submitted a DNA sample to an ancestry platform simply to learn about his family's roots, was a third-degree match to the profile from Loretta's door handle. The genealogical math, when the Gibby's forensic genealogy team ran it, pointed unambiguously to a single candidate: Raymond Dale Pruitt. The Gibby opened a formal investigation in April 2023. Investigators conducted covert surveillance and recovered a discarded paper cup from a trash receptacle outside a Savannah pharmacy. The DNA profile extracted from that cup was a full direct match to the sample collected from Loretta Pines' Datsun in September of 1979. Pruitt was arrested at his home on June 14, 2023. His neighbors watched from their doorways as officers led him to a waiting vehicle. Several of them would say afterward that they could not reconcile the man they had known, the pepper jelly, the polite nod across the parking lot, with what they were now being told about him. That was the word most of them used: reconcile. As if the man they thought they had known required an act of accounting, not simply a correction. The Howell County District Attorney's Office charged Raymond Dale Pruitt with murder in the first degree. Under state law and the terms of the investigation, Pruitt's legal team entered a guilty plea in exchange for a full accounting of events. In a statement read into the court record on November 8, 2023, Pruitt admitted that he had encountered Loretta Pines on Mill Creek Road on the evening of September 28, 1979. He admitted that her death was not an accident. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Loretta Pines' remains were located, through information provided in Pruitt's statement, on a parcel of land in the northeastern corner of Howell County that had once been his family's property. She was brought home in December 2023, 44 years, 2 months, and 11 days after she vanished. There is a photograph taken in the spring of 1979, just a few months before everything changed. It was taken by Joyce Hadley on a Saturday afternoon at the county fair. In it, Loretta Pines is standing beside the tilt-a-whirl, squinting slightly into the sun, her hair caught by the wind. She is laughing at something just outside the frame. She is 23 years old. She is wearing lavender shoes. When Joyce Hadley heard about the arrest, she sat down at her kitchen table and did not speak for a long time. Then she said, she knew. Her mother always knew. Edna Pines, who was 91 years old and still tending her pot of zinnias in Valdosta, was told the news by her granddaughter. According to those present, she did not cry. She asked only one question. Did he admit it? When told that he had, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, good. She had outlived him. Not in the way she'd meant. Raymond Dale Pruitt was still alive and would spend whatever years remained to him inside a cell. But she had outlived the secret. She had outlived the silence. She had lived long enough to hear his name said out loud in a court of law and attached to what he had done. Earl Braxton, 88 years old and living in assisted care in Macon, was reached by phone on the day of the arrest. He asked the caller to repeat the name. Then he said, I had him. I had him in front of me, and I couldn't prove it. He paused. But somebody did. The case of Loretta Pines changed at least two things in Howell County. The Sheriff's Department established a formal cold case review unit in 2024, the first in the county's history, with dedicated staff and a protocol for submitting biological evidence to genealogy platforms. And at Harlan Creek Elementary, in the newly renovated library, there is now a small reading corner with beanbag chairs, 4 of them in blue and yellow and green and red, donated in Loretta's name by her former students who are now in their 50s and who remembered. The peppermints. The notebook on the nightstand. The backward wave in the parking lot. The letter postmarked September 21st, 1979, that said the leaves were turning and she thought this might be her favorite time of year. Truth has a long memory. It does not always arrive on time, but it arrives. This case raises questions worth sitting with. Do you believe that a life sentence, delivered 44 years after the crime, constitutes real justice, or is there something that can never be restored, no matter what the courts do? What detail in this investigation stayed with you the most? The discarded evidence that sat untouched for decades, the genealogist working alone in his spare bedroom, or the mother who refused to stop believing? And what does it say about our systems that it took a retired volunteer, working without pay, to finally give Loretta Pines her name back? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere far from Harlan Creek, Georgia, tell us where. Justice found Loretta Pines after 44 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.